the Stanford Prison Experiment. In August of 1971, Professor Philip Zimbardo launched a psychological experiment that would forever change the way we look at human nature. His goal was simple: to explore the chilling power dynamics between prison guards and inmates. But what unfolded over the next 6 days would go far beyond his expectations. What began as a study of authority soon morphed into a nightmare, and what they discovered is terrifying: the capacity for cruelty that lies within us all. This is the story of one of the most infamous and horrifying experiments ever conducted, and the darkness it unleashed. Stanford University, August 1971. The air was thick with anticipation. The US Navy had asked Zimbardo to investigate how power works in prisons. How do guards wield control over prisoners? Is it the environment that corrupts? Or does brutality run deeper in the human psyche? The experiment would reveal things so disturbing they would haunt everyone involved, and eventually, the world.
It's unbelievable. They took my clothes. Hands off the door.
70 college students applied, all healthy, well-adjusted young men. No history of criminal behavior or psychological problems. But they didn't know what they were getting themselves into. The roles were assigned randomly, guards and prisoners. No one knew who would play which part. But from the moment they stepped into the mock prison, everything would change. 9 innocent young men were arrested in a dramatic fashion by real police officers. The prisoners were blindfolded, stripped of their dignity, and shoved into cramped, filthy cells. They had no idea they were stepping into a nightmare. The prison was set up in the basement of Stanford's Jordan Hall. It was no ordinary experiment. The cells were designed to be as claustrophobic and oppressive as possible. These were real conditions, consulted with former inmates and prison officials to make it as authentic as possible. And it worked. The guards, they were outfitted with real uniforms, nightsticks, whistles, everything they needed to command control. Many even wore mirrored sunglasses to avoid eye contact. For them, it was no longer just an experiment. It was real. The prisoners, on the other hand, were stripped of their identities. Numbered smocks, sandals, a humiliating nylon cap, no underwear, and chains around their ankles, clanking with every movement. On the very first night, things went horribly wrong. The guards, eager to assert their power, began to punish prisoners for the slightest infractions. A whistle in the night, a head count at 2:30 a.m., followed by forced push-ups. The prisoners rebelled, and in a split second, the atmosphere turned from controlled to chaos. The prisoners fought back, ripping off their numbers, barricading themselves inside their cells. But it only made things worse. The guards were ready for war. The guards fought back with fire extinguishers, pushing the prisoners out of their cells. They stripped them naked, dragged them into solitary confinement, and deprived them of sleep, food, and dignity. Power was the weapon, and the guards wielded it like monsters. To break the prisoners' will, the guards split them into 2 categories: the privileged and the punished. Those who obeyed the rules were rewarded: new clothes, extra food, a bed to sleep on. The others, they were starved, humiliated, forced to use buckets as toilets. The guards made sure the prisoners knew who had the power. By day 2, the psychological toll became unbearable. Doug Corpy, one of the prisoners, broke down completely, his emotions spiraling out of control, crying, raging, his mind unraveling before everyone's eyes. His distress was so severe, Zimbardo's team was forced to pull him from the experiment. But the damage was already done. On day 6, an unexpected twist: a mock parole board. The prisoners, desperate for freedom, were allowed to plead their cases for release. But something twisted happened. They no longer saw themselves as students in an experiment. They had become the prisoners. The roles were no longer just play acting. They had internalized them. And then, prisoner 819. His breakdown was so intense that it seemed as though he was living in a real prison. He sobbed uncontrollably, begging to be released. But when offered freedom, he refused. Why? Because the other prisoners had labelled him a bad inmate. He couldn't escape the role they had forced upon him. Zimbardo himself was no longer a researcher. He had become the warden, complicit in the terror. It wasn't until a visiting PhD student, Christina Maslach,
evolves into a confrontation, the guards showing the prisoners who's boss,
confronted him, horrified by what she saw, that Zimbardo began to question everything. It was too late. The damage was irreversible. The Stanford Prison Experiment was shut down after only 6 days, but the scars it left on the participants, both guards and prisoners, would last far longer. The experiment's findings remain controversial to this day, with some arguing it was nothing more than a staged demonstration. But one thing is certain. The darkness it revealed about human nature is terrifying. How far would you go? Would you become the oppressor, the victim, or would you resist? The Stanford Prison Experiment didn't just study prison life. It revealed something darker, a glimpse into the very soul of humanity, the Little Albert Experiment. In the early 1920s, one psychologist forever changed the way we understand human behavior. His name? John B. Watson. A pioneer of the behavioral school of psychology, Watson's work would go on to influence generations of researchers, but one experiment in particular would become infamous for its disturbing implications. Watson's experiment is not one you'd forget easily. It was an exploration into how fear could be created, not born out of trauma, but deliberately instilled, shaped and conditioned. What he showed was that fear could be learned, and that terrifying realization would leave a lasting scar on psychology. Watson built his experiment on a psychological concept, first demonstrated by Russian scientist Ivan Pavlov: classical conditioning. Pavlov had shown that you could pair a neutral stimulus with an unconditioned stimulus to elicit a natural response. For example, Pavlov conditioned dogs to salivate to the sound of a bell, something they had no natural reaction to. The question Watson had was this: could you condition a human to fear something that wasn't inherently frightening? Could fear be taught? Tukta, Little Albert. Albert was a 9-month-old infant, born to a nurse working at the Harriet Lane Home for Invalid Children, a place filled with sickly, hospitalized children. Though Albert's mother worked in a hospital environment, Albert was a happy, healthy and curious child. But his life was about to be upended by an experiment that would test the very limits of his emotions. Watson's experiment was deceptively simple. He wanted to see if he could condition a child to fear a neutral object, something Albert had no reason to be afraid of. First, Albert was introduced to a variety of objects. These included a white rat, a rabbit, a dog, a monkey, and even a seal skin coat. Albert had no fear of any of these objects. In fact, he smiled and reached for them, showing curiosity and a natural, instinctive desire to explore. The white rat in particular seemed to capture Albert's attention, and he was even eager to touch it. But Watson had already set his plan into motion. Each time Albert reached for the white rat, a loud, terrifying sound, a clanging metal bar, was struck behind his head. The noise was so jarring, so sudden, that it made Albert flinch in shock. His small face twisted in surprise and fear. At first, Albert didn't cry. He was startled but didn't yet associate the sound with the rat. However, the next time Albert reached for the rat, the same horrible sound rang out. This time, Albert cried. Watson repeated this process several times. Every time Albert reached for the rat, the loud sound followed, and with each repetition, Albert's response became more intense. He began to cry the moment he saw the rat. The experiment had succeeded. Albert was now conditioned to fear the white rat, an object that previously brought him no distress. But Watson didn't stop there. He wanted to see how far this conditioning could go, how deep the fear could spread. Now Albert was introduced to new objects, things that didn't resemble the rat at all. A rabbit, a dogosaurus, and even a seal fur coat. To Watson's surprise, Albert reacted in the same way. He cried. He recoiled. His heart raced. His body tensed in fear. Albert's fear of the white rat had generalized. It wasn't just the rat that terrified him now. Anything that resembled it, anything with similar features, a furry texture, a certain shape, triggered the same response. Watson had shown that fear wasn't just specific to one object. It could spread, grow, and even become more irrational. And Watson wasn't done yet. He wanted to test how deeply the fear had taken root, so he took Albert into a new environment. This time, Albert was placed in a large room, a room unfamiliar to him. Would his fear still hold, even in this new setting? When the same objects were presented again, Albert hesitated. He didn't cry immediately, but once the terrifying sound was introduced again, there it was. The fear returned just as powerful as before. Watson had proved his point. Fear could be conditioned. It could be made to last. It could be perpetuated. A month later, Albert was brought back for a follow-up test. The same objects, the same loud noise. Albert's response hadn't changed. The terror was still there, deeply ingrained in his mind. Watson had effectively conditioned Albert to fear, and it had not faded. This study would go down in history as one of the most disturbing and controversial in the history of psychology. Little Albert, a healthy, curious child, had been forever changed. His fear of objects that once brought him joy would likely haunt him for the rest of his life. The Stanford Prison Experiment and the Little Albert Experiment serve as chilling reminders of the dark side of science, where the pursuit of knowledge can come at the cost of human dignity and well-being. In both cases, researchers pushed ethical boundaries, manipulating participants in ways that caused lasting psychological harm. These experiments highlight the potential dangers of unchecked scientific ambition, raising important questions about the responsibility researchers have to protect those they study from harm. Lost civilizations are ancient societies that thrived in different parts of the world, but eventually vanished, leaving behind only traces of their existence. These mysterious cultures, like Atlantis, the Indus Valley Civilization, and the Maya, hold clues to humanity's past achievements, customs, and lifestyles. Despite extensive research, many aspects of their lives, innovations, and eventual decline remain hidden, fueling fascination and ongoing exploration. The Maya civilization. Long before the dawn of ancient Greece or the rise of Egypt, an incredible civilization was emerging in the deep, mysterious jungles of Central America, the Maya. Their story, rich with achievement and shadowed by struggles, tells of a people who built grand cities, developed sophisticated knowledge, and ultimately faced conquest and collapse. Around 40,000 BCE, bands of ancient travelers crossed a frigid land bridge connecting Siberia to North America. Slowly, over generations, they migrated southward, searching for a climate with less harsh winters, abundant hunting grounds, and thriving plant life. By 10,000 BCE, these early peoples reached what is now Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula. Here, they found lands teeming with life, forests rich with animals, waters full of fish, and rocks harboring precious stones like jade and obsidian. This bountiful environment was the cradle in which the Maya civilization would be born and flourish. As centuries passed, early communities began experimenting with agriculture. By 6000 BCE, they had mastered the art of farming, particularly maize, which provided steady food supplies, and laid the foundation for more complex societies. With an abundance of food, population numbers grew, and villages turned into bustling communities. By 1500 BCE, the Maya entered what is known as the pre-classic period, a time when their small tribal villages transformed into chiefdoms governed by local leaders. Trade networks emerged, linking the Maya with other cultures. The Maya exchanged goods, ideas, and spiritual beliefs with groups like the Olmecs, adopting their gods, ceremonial practices, and even aspects of their art and architecture. Their cities expanded, with towering temples and grand public spaces. The construction of La Danta, in the ancient city of El Mirador, marked one of the early peaks of Maya achievement. Rising to 236 feet, La Danta was one of the tallest structures in the ancient world, an architectural marvel surrounded by dense jungle. But even as they built these monuments to their gods, warfare became an increasing part of Maya society. Powerful rulers sought to expand their domains, and rivalries formed among city-states. Maya warfare was intense and ruthless. Kings led their warriors, armed with fearsome weapons such as spear throwers or atlatls, clubs, and axes. Battle was brutal, especially in the dense, uneven terrain of the jungle. Raiders sought wealth and power, seizing captives and looting treasures from neighboring cities. These prisoners were often sacrificed to appease the gods, a ritual that was deeply woven into Maya beliefs. Blood was seen as the ultimate offering, and rulers believed it was their duty to ensure the gods were properly honored, especially in times of crisis. The rivalry between the city-states of Tikal and Calakmul became legendary. These two powerful centers vied for dominance, and their struggles spanned generations. Though Calakmul ultimately gained the upper hand, the ongoing wars, coupled with environmental stressors like droughts and soil depletion, pushed the Maya civilization to a breaking point. By the 9th century, many of the once great cities in the southern lowlands were abandoned. It was the end of what has come to be known as the Maya Golden Age, a period of unparalleled cultural and intellectual achievement. As the southern cities fell, new centers of power emerged in the north, especially in the Yucatan Peninsula. Chichen Itza rose as a dominant force, its strategic location allowing it to control maritime trade routes that stretched across Mesoamerica. The city flourished and became a hub of cultural exchange, where ideas, goods, and art flowed freely. But Chichen Itza's prominence was short-lived. By the mid-11th century, the city was weakened by internal strife and wars, leading to its decline. Without a central power, Maya civilization slowly fragmented, and their cities began to slip into obscurity. In the early 16th century, a new and more dangerous threat loomed on the horizon: the Spanish conquistadors. In 1527, Spanish forces invaded the Yucatan Peninsula. Unlike the city-state rivalries of the past, this enemy was relentless, armed with firearms, steel weapons, and a weapon the Maya had never encountered: disease. Epidemics of smallpox and other European diseases ravaged the Maya population, killing tens of thousands who had no immunity to these new illnesses. Despite the overwhelming force of the Spanish, the Maya resisted fiercely. They held off the invaders for years, retreating into dense jungles and mounting counterattacks. But disease, combined with the brutal tactics of the conquistadors, devastated the population. By 1546, nearly all Maya lands were under Spanish control. The Spanish sought not only to conquer, but also to erase the Maya way of life. Ancient codices, filled with knowledge about the Maya's history, beliefs, and sciences, were burned by Spanish priests who viewed them as pagan relics. Sacred temples were defiled or torn down, and the Maya were forced to abandon their gods in favor of Christianity. Entire libraries of Maya knowledge were destroyed, erasing centuries of their wisdom and cultural heritage. Yet the Maya spirit survived. Though the civilization as it had once existed was gone, many Maya people persisted. They kept alive fragments of their ancient culture, traditions, and beliefs, blending them with the practices forced upon them by the Spanish. Today, descendants of the Maya still inhabit Central America, preserving their language, arts, and customs as a testament to their ancestors' resilience. The Maya were more than just builders of pyramids or inventors of calendars. They were survivors, a people whose story spans thousands of years, shaped by both astounding achievements and unimaginable hardships. Their legacy remains, a civilization that rose and fell in the heart of the jungle, but left an enduring mark on the world. The Easter Island civilization. Easter Island, a place of mystery, wonder, and haunting history. Known for its towering stone statues, the Moai, this isolated paradise in the Pacific holds a tragic tale of survival, resilience, and downfall. Today, we're going to dive deep into the eerie, unsettling story of how this once thriving society seemingly vanished. Get ready, because the story of Easter Island is not just about statues, it's a warning. Imagine it's over 1,000 years ago. A group of Polynesian explorers has landed on this lush, isolated paradise. They find an island filled with towering palm trees, flocks of exotic birds, and fertile plains. This place is perfect, a land where they can settle, grow, and flourish. They name it Rapa Nui. For years, they thrive. The Rapa Nui develop advanced farming techniques, build a complex society, and come to master both land and sea. But, for reasons lost to time, they begin an extraordinary project, the Moai statues. Standing at 13 feet tall and weighing up to 14 tons, these stone giants require immense effort to carve and move. How did they do it? No one knows for sure. But what we do know is that building these statues required resources, lots of them. Resources that kept the people of Easter Island alive. As their society grew, so did their needs. According to one theory, the Rapa Nui began practicing slash-and-burn agriculture, clearing vast sections of the forest to make room for crops and to provide the wood they needed to move the massive Moai. At one point, there were as many as 16 million trees on the island. But by the time Europeans arrived, it was barren, nothing but rocky soil and bare earth. Imagine the terror as the last tree fell, knowing that without wood, they couldn't build canoes to fish, couldn't make tools, couldn't fuel fires. It must have felt like the end of the world. Yet, there's another theory, one that's even darker. Some researchers believe the forest didn't vanish because of human activity. Instead, they think the island was the victim of a different kind of invader, rats. When the Polynesians first arrived, they unknowingly brought stowaways with them. These rats quickly spread, devouring the seeds of palm trees and preventing new growth. The trees died out, not from human hands, but from the relentless gnawing of rodents. And as the forests disappeared, the soil began to erode. Food sources became scarce, and the people of Rapa Nui were trapped, victims of an enemy they couldn't see. And then the Europeans came. In 1722, Dutch explorer Jacob Roggeveen arrived on Easter Island. He reported finding around 2,000 to 3,000 inhabitants, struggling to survive. But if the Rapa Nui thought things were already bleak, they had no idea what was coming. With the Europeans came disease, smallpox and syphilis to name a few. The Rapa Nui had been isolated for centuries and had no immunity to these foreign diseases. By the time British explorer Captain James Cook arrived in 1774, the islanders were a shadow of their former selves, ravaged by sickness and desperation. The final blow came in the 1860s, when Peruvian slave raiders targeted Easter Island. Nearly 2,000 Rapa Nui were captured and forced into brutal labour. Only a handful ever returned, and those who did brought with them more deadly diseases, wiping out entire families and villages. But what about the Moai? As resources dwindled, some say the Rapa Nui people began to resent the very statues they had worshipped. Blaming the Moai for their suffering, they toppled some of them, gouging out their eyes and leaving them to rot in the earth. It was as if they were trying to bury their past, their gods, their failures. In their desperation, a new religion arose, the Birdman cult. The people turned to a new god, Make, hoping he would bring them salvation. Each year, young men would risk their lives in dangerous competitions, swimming through shark-infested waters to retrieve the first egg of a sacred seabird. They believed that whoever returned with the egg would become the Birdman, Make's chosen leader, and that he would bring prosperity to the island. It was a desperate hope, born out of unimaginable hardship. For centuries, people believed the Rapa Nui turned on each other, warring over resources and even resorting to cannibalism. But recent research has cast doubt on these gruesome tales. Evidence suggests that, instead of turning to savagery, the Rapa Nui adapted to survive as best they could. They found new ways to grow food and hold on to their traditions even in the face of collapse. Easter Island is a haunting place, a silent reminder of what can happen when we deplete the very resources we rely on, whether by our own actions or by forces beyond our control. What caused the fall of Rapa Nui? Was it the trees, the rats, or the horrors brought by European contact? Maybe it was all of these things combined. One thing is certain. When you look into the eyes of the Moai, you're looking into a story of resilience, tragedy, and mystery that has haunted Easter Island for centuries. The Maya and Easter Island civilizations both collapsed due to a mix of environmental strain and external pressures. Their stories reveal the delicate balance between human achievement and nature's limits. Science has revolutionized our world, but behind its brilliance lies a darker side. From unethical experiments to environmental harm, not all discoveries come without consequence. In this video, we'll uncover the hidden truths and unintended dangers that often accompany scientific progress. Stay tuned as we explore the shadows of science.